How do you think it's gone?
Well, it's not been boring. It's been quite a roller coaster. I mean, things are going, I think, reasonably well. I mean, we've seen some all-time highs in terms of total user time. We passed 8 billion user minutes per day. So usage is up. And we're doing it with a small fraction of the original, headcount. So
If it doesn't keep you up at night, that Twitter might go offline again.
At this point, I think we've got a pretty good handle on what makes Twitter work. We're also doing it with 2 data centers instead of 3. So the actual CPU usage or computer usage is dramatically less. The system, despite being at all-time highs of usage, is fast. It's responsive. It's more responsive than it was before the takeover. At the point at which the transaction closed, Twitter was tracking to lose over $3 billion a year. And had $1 billion in the bank. So that's 4 months to death. In rough numbers, a normal year, Twitter would do, let's say $4.5 billion in revenue, $4.5 billion in cost. I mean, it was really kind of like a non-profit. I mean, they'd run it at roughly break even.
It's not bankruptcy. You're not saving that company from bankruptcy if it's breaking even.
But then the issue is that if you then add $1.5 billion in debt servicing and have a massive drop in revenue, which we did, which was partly cyclic and partly political concerns and whatever. So revenue, call it dropped by over a third. But in rough numbers, revenue dropped from $4.5 billion to $3 billion. Expenses went from $4.5 to $6 billion, creating a $3 billion negative cash flow situation, and Twitter having $1 billion in the bank. That's 4 months to live. So unless drastic action was taken immediately, this company's going to die.
Let's talk about that drastic action, because almost immediately you sacked a lot of Twitter workers.
The issue is the company's either going to go bankrupt if we do not cut costs immediately. This is not a uncaring situation. It's like if the whole ship sinks, then nobody's got a job.
But a lot of people just lost their jobs like that. They didn't even know they'd lost their jobs often. They were just frozen out of their accounts.
What would you do?
Well, you might want to give someone some notice. I mean, you might. By the way, I'm not running Twitter, but,
I know, but
this is the criticism, and this is what staff members say. A little bit of notice,
No, I understand. You have 4 months to live. 120 days. In 120 days, you're dead. So what do you want to do?
How much are you worth? You're framing it in a way that it had a few months to live. You're quite a rich man.
I sold a lot of Tesla stock to close this deal. I did not want to sell the Tesla stock.
Do you have any regrets on the way that some of the staff were let go?
People were given, 3 months of severance, some cases more. Like I said, the companies need to be run on their own cognizance, and it's not so easy for me to sell stock as people might think. I have to sell stock during certain periods. I can't sell stock during other periods. There are only brief windows where I can sell Tesla stock. This is often taken as some lack of faith in Tesla. The Tesla stock sales caused the Tesla stock to plummet, which is not good.
After you let go of a lot of staff, and then you started making some more policy decisions. One of those policy decisions was to bring Donald Trump back. Do you expect him to come back at any point? Like, have you spoken to him?
I haven't spoken to him. I don't know. He may or may not come back. But the point is that Twitter should be a town square that gives equal voice to the whole country and ideally the whole world. It should not be a partisan politics, more of a partisan politics that are on the very far left of the spectrum. San Francisco, Berkeley politics normally is quite niche, but if Twitter effectively acted as a megaphone for very niche regional politics and megaphone that to the world. In order for something to serve as a digital town square, it must serve all people from all political persuasions, provided it's legal. Close to half the country voted for Trump. I wasn't one of them. I voted for Biden. But nonetheless, free speech is meaningless unless you allow people you don't like to say things you don't like. At the point at which you lose free speech, it doesn't come back.
Do you think you prioritize freedom of speech over misinformation and hate speech?
Who's to say that something is misinformation? Who's the arbiter of that? Is it the BBC?
You are the arbiter on Twitter because you own Twitter.
Yes, I'm saying who is to say that one person's misinformation is another person's information? So the point I'm trying to make is that the BBC itself has, at times, published things that are false. Do you agree that has occurred?
I'm quite sure the BBC have said things before that turn out to not be true in its, whatever it is, 100-year history, I'm quite sure.
Yes, even if you aspire to be accurate, there are times when you will not be.
But you accept there has to be a line in terms of hate speech.
Well, I mean, I generally am of the opinion that if the people of a given country are against a certain type of speech, they should talk to their elected representatives and pass a law to prevent it. So, for example, you cannot advocate murdering someone. That's illegal. So there are limits to speech.
Do you accept that there's more misinformation on the platform if it's not being policed in the same way?
I actually think there's less these days because we've eliminated so many of the bots which were pushing scams and spam. And previous management turned a blind eye to the bots because their bonuses were tied to user growth. If your compensation is tied to user growth, well, you're not going to look too closely at some of the users. So I think we've got less misinformation because we don't have the bot problem that we used to do. And we also have given a lot of attention to community notes, which corrects, with community itself, corrects misinformation. It's been very effective.
We have spoken to people who have been sacked that used to be in content moderation, and we've spoken to people very recently who were involved in moderation, and they just say there's not enough people to police this stuff, particularly around hate speech.
I mean, you use Twitter.
Right.
Do you see a rise in hate speech?
I mean,
just a personal anecdote. Like, what do you? I don't.
Personally, my for you, I would see I get more of that kind of content. Yeah, personally, but I'm not going to talk to the rest of for the rest of Twitter.
You see more hate speech personally.
I would say I would see more hateful content in that.
Content you don't like or hateful. What do you mean to describe a hateful thing?
Yeah, I mean, just content that will solicit a reaction, something that may include something that is slightly racist or slightly sexist, those kinds of things.
So you think if something is slightly sexist, it should be banned?
No,
Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying anything. I'm saying.
Well, I'm just curious. I'm trying to understand what you mean by hateful content. And I'm asking for specific examples. And you just said that if something is slightly sexist, that's hateful content. Does that mean that it should be banned?
Well, you've asked me whether my feed, whether it's got less or more. I'd say it's got slightly more.
That's why I'm asking for examples. Can you name one example?
I honestly don't use. Honestly, I don't.
You can't name a single example.
I'll tell you why. Because I don't actually use that for you feed anymore. Because I just don't particularly like it.
But
and actually, a lot of people are quite similar. I only look at my following.
You said you've seen more hateful content, but you can't name a single example, not even one.
I'm not sure I've used that feed for the last 3 or 4 weeks, and
how did you see the hateful content?
Because I've been using Twitter since you've taken it over for the last 6 months.
Okay, so then you must have at some point seen for you hateful content. I'm asking for one example.
Right.
And you can't give a single one.
And I'm saying
then I say, sir, that you don't know what you're talking about.
Really?
Yes, because you can't give me a single example of hateful content, not even one tweet, and yet you claimed that the hateful content was high.
Well,
that's false.
No, what I claimed.
You just lied.
What I claimed was. There are many organizations that say that kind of information is on the rise. Now, whether it has on my feed or not, I mean, right, and if you look at something like the Strategic Dialogue Institute in the UK, they will say that. So
look, people will say all sorts of nonsense. I'm literally asking for a single example, and you can't name one.
Right, and as I've already said, I don't use that feed. But
then how would you know?
I don't think this is getting anywhere.
You literally said you experienced more hateful content, and then couldn't name a single example.
Right, and as I said,
that's absurd.
I haven't actually looked at that feed.
Then how would you know this hateful content?
Because I'm saying that's what I saw a few weeks ago. I can't give you an exact example. Let's move on. We only have a certain amount of time. COVID misinformation. You changed the COVID misinformation
rules. Has BBC changed its COVID misinformation?
The BBC does not set the rules on Twitter, so I'm asking you.
No, I'm talking about the BBC's misinformation about COVID.
I'm literally asking you about, you changed the labels, the COVID misinformation labels. There used to be a policy, it then disappeared. Why do that?
Well, COVID is no longer an issue. Does the BBC hold itself at all responsible for misinformation regarding masking and side effects of vaccinations, and not reporting on that at all? And what about the fact that the BBC was put under pressure by the British government to change its editorial policy? Are you aware of that?
This is not an interview about the BBC.
Oh, you thought it wasn't?
I see now why you've done Twitter Spaces. I am not a representative of the BBC's editorial policy. I want to make that clear. Since you became CEO, there's been another story in town.
No,
TikTok.
I'm not CEO anymore.
Okay, you're chief twit, or what are you?
No, my dog Floki is the CEO.
Okay, so TikTok has also been in the news. There's talk of perhaps the Biden administration wanting to potentially ban it or force a sale. What's your view of the situation?
I mean, one of the reasons that I emphasize that that our goal here at Twitter is to maximize unregretted user minutes or unregretted user time is that I hear many people tell me they spent a lot of time on TikTok, but they regret the time spent. And that seems like, okay, well, we don't want to have regretted time. We want the time to be unregretted, where you learned things, you were entertained, amused. I get more laughs out of Twitter than anything else, and many people tell me the same thing. So that's a good sign. I can't say I have a strong opinion on TikTok. You know, I'm generally against banning things.
Do you feel sometimes that your many business interests might get in the way of you having opinion? I mean, for example, Tesla has major connections in China. You wouldn't have a certain opinion on something or feel uncomfortable about saying something because of your other business interests elsewhere?
Do I look uncomfortable? Actually, I do. I look uncomfortable. Tesla's got activities around the world, and so does SpaceX. You know, once in a while, those things do come into conflict, but it's not like Twitter's operates in China. It doesn't. It was banned in China. So, and certainly I've received no communication whatsoever from the Chinese government with regard to Twitter.
In terms of advertising, have all the advertisers come back?
Not all, but most. I mean, you can see it for yourself on Twitter.
How is it going? Is Twitter in profit now?
We're roughly break even at this point. Depending on how things go, if current trends continue, I think we could be profitable. To be more precise, we could be cash flow positive this quarter if things keep going well.
Can you say which advertisers haven't come back?
I actually don't know of anyone who said definitively they're not coming back. If Disney feels comfortable advertising, children's movies, and Apple feels comfortable advertising iPhones, those are good indicators that Twitter is a good place to advertise.
Do you have any regrets buying Twitter?
I think it was something that needed to be done. The pain level of Twitter has been extremely high. This hasn't been some sort of party. It's been really quite a stressful situation. So it's been quite painful. Were there many mistakes made along the way? Of course. But all's well that ends well. We're headed to a good place. We're roughly break even. I think we're trending towards being cash flow positive very soon, like literally in a matter of months. The advertisers are returning. I think the quality of recommended tweets has improved significantly, and we've taken a lot of feedback from people that have looked at the open source recommendation algorithm, and we've made a lot of improvements even since that was made open source, and we're going to keep doing that. Overall, I think the trend is very good.
Can you just talk me through the emotional strain of this?
Look, I've been under constant attack. It's not like I, have a stone cold heart or something like that. If you're under constant criticism and attack, and then that gets fed to you nonstop, including through Twitter. It's rough. I kind of think that if you do lose your feedback loop, that's actually not good. So I think it is actually important to get negative feedback. I don't turn replies off, and I actually I removed my entire block list. So I don't block anyone either. So I get a lot of negative feedback.
Is that the thing that's been most difficult to take, the sort of negative feedback?
Yeah, I mean, if the media is writing non-stop stories about why you're a horrible person, it's hurtful.
Do you feel you have a kind of odd relationship with the media?
Yes. This is sort of part and parcel of having a free media situation. I do take heart in that the media is actually able to trash me on a regular basis in the United States and the UK and whatnot. Whereas, in a lot of other places, the media cannot say mean things to powerful people. But I think it's better that we have a situation where the media can say mean things to powerful people.
Let's talk about verification labels. You obviously want to create another revenue stream that's subscription-based. Is verification the way to do that? Because we have a kind of a situation at the moment where the New York Times doesn't have a verified badge, whereas anyone else who can pay whatever few bucks a month can. Is that what you envisaged when you bought Twitter?
I must confess to some delight in removing the verified badge from the New York Times. That was great.
But on a serious note, it could flame disinformation again if you have verified accounts that are from anyone who can pay money. They go up to potentially the top of feeds. They get more action on Twitter, and traditional media that may not pay for verification doesn't. Do you see how that could potentially be a driver of misinformation?
I think the media is a driver of misinformation much more than the media would like to admit that they are. I think in a lot of cases it is the average citizen that knows more than the journalist. In fact, I mean, very often when I see an article about something that I know a lot about, and I read the article, and it's like, they get a lot wrong. So the best interpretation is someone who doesn't really understand what's going on in industry, has only a few facts to play with, has to come up with an article. Now, it's going to be, it's not going to hit the bullseye. If you read an article about something that you know about, how accurate is that article? That is how essentially all articles are. They're an approximation of what's going on, but not an exact situation. So if somebody is actually, let's say, in the fray, or like an expert in the field, and was actually there, and writes about their experience of being actually there, I think that actually that's in a lot of cases going to be better than a journalist, because the journalist wasn't there.
In theory, all legacy blue ticks gone next week, and at that point you'll kind of work out whether this is going to sink or swim.
Yes.
What are you looking for in terms of a revenue stream on that?
Well, I don't know if it's like necessarily a giant revenue stream. If you have sort of 1 million people that are subscribed for, let's say, $100 a year-ish, that's $100 million. That's a fairly small revenue stream relative to advertising. What we're really trying to do here with verification is to massively raise the cost of disinformation and bots. So my prediction is that any social media company that does not insist on paid verification will simply be overwhelmed by advanced AI bots. I mean, ChatGPT is essentially a zillion instances of ChatGPT.
But a lot of organizations have already said they're not going to pay, like the New York Times.
Well, then, that's up to them if they, can make them pay. It's a small amount of money, so I don't know what their problem is. But we're going to treat everyone equally. So what we're not going to do is say that there's some anointed class of journalists who are the special ones who get to tell everyone what they should think. That it should be up to the people what they think. And even if an article is completely accurate, comprehensive, and everything, there's still in writing that article, the media is choosing the narrative. They're deciding what to write an article about. So I'm hopeful that this can be more a case of the public choosing the narrative, as opposed to the media choosing the narrative. And the media can choose the narrative, at least a combination of the media and the public choosing the narrative. And the public getting to weigh in on stories if they think that they should add something to it, or we've got something wrong. And over time, I think if Twitter is the best source of truth, it will succeed. And if we are not the best source of truth, we will fail.
Someone comes in and offers you $44 billion for Twitter right now. Would you take it?
No.
Would you consider it?
Depends on who. I suppose if I was confident that they would pursue, they would rigorously pursue the truth, then I guess I would be glad to hand it off to someone else. I don't care about the money really, but I do want to have some source of truth that I can count on. That's our aspiration with Twitter, is to have a source of truth that you can count on. It's also real time. It's an immediate source of truth that you can count on, and that gets more accurate with time as people comment on a particular thing.
Have you got a successor in mind?
Not yet. Hopefully at some point.
This office, are you thinking about moving out of San Francisco?
Not yet. No, I mean, this place is nice, and we I kind of like this office building, actually.
You've also talked about how potentially, I think you might have been joking, but you could turn this into a homeless shelter. So
yes.
I guess the reason I'm asking is, you've
we tried to turn it into a homeless shelter, and the building owner rejected it.
You tried to.
Yeah, they won't let us.
Which bits have you tried to turn into a homeless shelter?
We're only using one of the buildings, and so the other building could be a homeless shelter.
And you've tried to.
Yeah, we would like to do it right now.
Really?
Yes.
And
no,
you're being stopped by who?
By the building owner.
They won't let you?
No. In fact, they wouldn't even let us take the W off the sign.
What's the most difficult thing you've had to do? What's the hardest thing you've had to do?
In my whole life?
In the last 6 months. We're talking about the last 6 months as you as Twitter boss here.
Well, shutting down one of our service centers was quite difficult because it turns out there were, I thought the service centers were redundant, but there were, in fact, a lot of things that were hard-coded to this one service center. And so when we shut it down, we actually, it was quite catastrophic. We lost a lot of functionality, in which we sort of really rushed to put it back. And that was around late December, early January.
What were the levels of staff, and what are they now?
Around 1,500 people at this point. And there was, I think, 800.
Has it been hard letting that many people go?
Yeah. Not fun at all. It's painful.
Do you feel like you're an impulsive person?
I mean, have I shot myself in the foot with tweets multiple times? Yes. I mean, a good friend of mine actually had a good suggestion, and it has helped, which is that if you're going to tweet something that maybe is controversial, save it as a draft and look at it the next day and see if you still want to tweet it. And that has been a good rule of thumb.
Do you have any regrets?
I mean, one can always, hindsight's 20/20, so that, a bunch of decisions that could have been made better, for sure. As I said, all's well that ends well, and things are going pretty well. So in the grand scheme of things, I can't complain.